The long jump, a meaningful way to plan the gap year, and we have 4 speakers today. I welcome all the 4 of you. There's Anuradha Gupta, Head Partner Engagement, Macquarie University, Australia. Then there's Dhruva Bhatt, Director Lumiere Education, and Kritika Balaji from Academic Manager ICE3 Institute US, and Pragati Pandey for University Counselor, Aga Khan Academy, Hyderabad. Welcome all, and I request to begin.
Okay.
Before we begin, just a second. You all have the feedback forms. We'll need it in the end. The volunteer will pick it up, or you can just give it to them. Thank you.
Do I need to stand in a particular place? Is this okay? Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all, and hi to the virtual audience who are joining us from different parts of the world. Thank you so much for being here, and we're really excited about this session. So the long jump, how to plan an effective gap year. This is a topic I proposed because this is a topic that's also very close to my heart. As after my grade 12, I took a gap year before I started university. And I think it was one of the most profound and meaningful experiences that I've had. And I thought it would be nice to just share that journey and also just understand what is the general perception of gap years today, what we could do to make that a viable option for people, and what we can do to help people plan that gap year effectively as well, right? So a little bit of my context and story. I was a 17-year-old who had no idea what I wanted to do, much like most students today. And in my confusion, I serendipitously became the intern to my career guidance counselor in high school. So I helped a lot of students fill out their applications, write their essays. And I enjoyed that process so much that I seriously considered after grade 12 pursuing a career as a college counselor. The problem though was there was no formal degree at the time called undergraduate bachelor's in career and college counseling. I think you had to do a bachelor's in psychology and maybe specialize in the future. And it seemed a little far-fetched, especially in the Indian context where there wasn't a lot of traction, recognition, or even validation for this as a profession. So at that time, I had to stop, and I thought, what's the next closest thing? So my career counselor said, yeah, you have decent communication skills. Why don't you do a bachelor's in communication? And I got into 3 universities as well in the US. But I just didn't feel like I had the conviction with what I was studying. And my grade 12 scores were okay. So my counselor managed to successfully persuade my parents and myself to consider gap year. She told them she could maybe retake some of her exams and do better on the scores and get into other universities. And I told myself, like, I don't feel so convinced about this communications thing, so let me take a year off to figure out what I could really study. Because to me, the most important thing is you need to know why you're studying what you're studying. Otherwise, there's going to be no longevity and no connection to it, essentially, right? You're not going to feel that conviction in the long run when you're working. So that's one of the things I wanted to do. But of course, we live here in India. There's a lot of skepticism around this topic. And I got asked a lot of questions because I'm also from a middle-income family. And the first thing was, what if you get left behind a year by your peers? How are you going to catch up with them? What is it going to mean for you when you're applying for college again? Are they going to take you seriously? What about interviews? How will you explain this gap in your job interviews? And of course, the most important question in the Indian context, what are you going to tell your relatives, right? Like, how are you going to explain this decision to them? So I did have to think through all of these questions, but I can say undoubtedly this was the most, really one of the best decisions I've made in my life because I've grown so much in that gap year. First and foremost, I did get to retake my exams and do better on my scores. Not that it made a significant difference, but it allowed me the time to pause, drop the communications program, and move towards a liberal arts program, which suited me much better in the long run. The other thing is, I got to travel. So I did a volunteer program in Berlin, Germany for 6 months. I lived there, worked there. It was an all-expense-paid trip. I just had to volunteer my time. I also got to do some self-development workshops. So I did some self-awareness and self-development workshops. And lastly, I think it helped me build a lot of skills because in that work experience, I got to do sales tasks that helped me build persuasion skills and negotiation skills. And I'm talking as a 17-year-old, right? that's invaluable because now you're entering university with a new perspective on what it's like to work before you start college. And there's a much more serious appreciation for what you're learning. The other thing is I learned to work in a team because a lot of the event planning that we did required me to learn to collaborate with people, manage logistics and operations. Again, invaluable learning for a 17-year-old before you start education. So these were things that really stood out to me. And I think as a person, I grew tenfold. I worked in an office with people from 30 different countries. And it was great because suddenly you have so much more exposure and perspective. So these are some things that really, really stood out to me from my gap year experience. But before we get ahead, I know that I just want to get a quick understanding. Can we move the slide? How many of us here have worked with a student who's taken a gap year? Okay. Well, that's great. We got a couple of people who've worked with people who've got gap years. Awesome. And can I just get a quick, sorry, go to the next slide. What is your perception of a gap year? Let's hear a few responses, maybe from the virtual audience as well. So would anyone like to share what is your perspective of a gap year and your stance on it, essentially? Okay. Oh, hang on, sorry. Can we just have a second cordless mic?
I feel it becomes very fruitful if it is planned properly.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
one major part of it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anyone else would like to share? Yes, can you just pass? Yeah, and then next to her.
I think it's the time when you leave that syllabus bond what you were doing and you can hone the skills that you actually want to do. So that is what I think of a gap year.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Especially in academic curriculums that might be quite rigid, right? I'll just get to the back and then come to you in a sec.
I think a gap year is splendid if one has a solid reason for it. So if there is a journey of self-discovery, like something what you went through, it's amazing. But if you're just going to sit around doing nothing, then it's not really value-adding. And every university needs an explanation of why you're taking a gap year, and you explain it in the next. So there has to be some solid reason to take the gap year.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I think for self-conviction and to make it legible, something that you can explain clearly to others, right? Awesome. I think, let me take one audience response, virtual audience response, and then come to you. Can this Shruti Parasnis, who's raised her hands, can we get her on the screen, if it's possible?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Yeah, hi,
Hi.
good morning, Kritika. There was a student of mine who took a gap year because he wanted to prepare for at that time there were pre-medical exams. So that is why he took the gap year. And while preparing, he realized that he was not into medicine. He did not want to go ahead with medicine. And then he did a little introspection and all. And then uh, uh, like, uh, we discussed this, even though I was not a career counselor then, but then we just happened to have a talk about what were his interests and all. And somehow he felt, "Ki, ma'am, I don't know, but like maybe I can go for law." And he's doing very well. So maybe like he had started out preparing for medicine, but then he went on to become a lawyer, and he's a very successful lawyer today. So I think that he used that gap year for introspection. I think when you're not doing anything, it gives you time to think about things, reflect upon what you are doing and why you are doing,
Absolutely, yeah.
and maybe realize your true potential.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, ma'am. Thank you so much for sharing that,
Yeah.
and thank you for making headway into something that we're going to address very shortly, which is
Thank you.
the benefits of, the academic benefits of taking a gap year as well. So thank you so much for that. Yes, ma'am, we'll take your response and then go ahead.
So similar to what Shruti was talking about, when students, just go from school to college to work, very often they're not allowed. They don't have the ability to explore themselves and actually figure out what exactly they want to do. And that is why you see so many people who have done their college in a particular field, but then have gone diametrically opposite to another field where they found they have interest, and they've taken that up as their passion.
Thank you so much. A lot of great insights there. Vaishnavi, can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is great to hear from our perspective to understand where the audience is at with the concept of the gap year. And it'll be nice to also hear from our panelists, because each of our panelists represents a different starter. One is from a school, a university, and the industry. So let's hear from them as to how the school, universities, and industry receive a gap year overall. So let me start with Pragati. So Pragati, you can share a little bit with us about the school perspective.
Thank you, Kritika. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, I'm a counselor, and from the color of your tags, I understand majority of you are counselors over here. So I'm going to start with a story. 10 years back, I had a set of parents sitting in my office. The mother was howling and crying, and the father was like very quiet, very well-to-do family, well endowed, but they were like, what is my child going to do? He doesn't want to go to university. He's our only son. And I myself was as confused that what do I do? What is this child doing? Look at his mother. She's crying and howling away. I went to my head of school and he looked at me and he said, Pragati, some children are late bloomers. They, take time to identify. So my journey with understanding gap years as a counselor started roughly 10, 11 years back when I had this experience with a student and a set of parents. So I would be talking a lot about a parent's perspective and a counselor's perspective. How do we deal with it? Sometimes we reach out for support from people who are more experienced in the field of handling parents and understanding teenagers in general. Another story I'll tell you, which was a very comfortable one, same 10 years back. This student was a diabetic student. She lived in our residences for 2 years. She would always carry a vial with her because she would get, she would have the need to use it at any point during the day. And I used to think a 15, 16-year-old, how is she managing, and she's living in residences, eating normal food which is served in the dining hall. A dancer, and same batch, I had a set of parents who were so comfortable with the idea that my daughter is going to go to university. A year later, she wants to dance. She wants to just move around the country and perform in different parts of the country. She wants to start an NGO, and then she wants to move to university. So together sometimes, we have two diverse set of expectations from parents and students. And this student, in a very planned way, moved on to continue with her dance performances. She's a trained Kathak dancer performing on stage. And she started her NGO. After a year, she went on to Mount Holyoke on a full funding. And she completed her graduation. Today, she's back in India. She works in India. She continues to work with an NGO. So two different experiences. I'll elaborate on the first child when I'm speaking more about how we handle the parents and what the journey looked like when I present more on the topic. So
Thank you so much. Okay, let's hear from Anuradha on the university perspective of this topic.
Thank you, Pragati. Thank you, Kritika. So I think from the university perspective, first of all, good morning. Thank you for making this session early morning here. From the university perspective, I think I just want to touch upon three main things. What? Am I audible? Yeah, thank you. Louder?
Why don't you try this mic?
Thank you. I'm usually quite loud. If you heard me last evening, you know how loud I can get. So just from the university perspective, there are three questions that we primarily need to ask. Why is a student taking the gap year? What is your role as a counselor? And what will I do as a university? How do I perceive that application? And that is what I want to talk about when we get slightly deeper into the session. But I think you've covered some great points already. Someone mentioned in the audience that it has to be for a reason. So yes, what is the reason? Does it connect to their education? Does it connect to their career plan? Or, they just want to take it. It's okay. They just want a gap year. Been working since 2004, and I'm actually ready for a gap year. Yes. So I can totally understand. You are right. If I didn't love my salary, I probably would take it right away, and it's getting recorded. Thank you.
And also, the key bits about what a student can actually do if they want to take an academic gap year. So it's not just about preparing for competitive exams, but as a university, as an international university, what can I offer to your student if they want to come to me for a gap year? So I think we'll touch upon these as we go in to the session, and I'm going to hand over to Dhruva because he's got a lot of practical experience in designing gap year for students. So some more tips from Dhruva.
Thank you, Anuradha, and hello, everyone. My name is Dhruva, and super excited to be here. So I grew up in Chennai, went to a CBSE school in Mylapore. For anyone from Chennai, understand the context there. And the only conception of a gap year that I had was if you wanted to take a year off to study for the IIT JEE or the medical entrance exams, and then you would prepare for it. So that was the entirety of what a gap year meant to me. That began to change when I went off to university. So I did a bachelor's degree in economics at Harvard, and there I started to meet people who had gone on gap years, done all sorts of things. And the one thing that was common to every single one of them was that not a single person regretted having taken a gap year. Every single person that I had met who was there at that university, some selection bias, but who were there, appreciated having taken that gap year. Many years later, now that I run a research scholar program for high school students, so we match high school students with PhD mentors in a guided, structured research program, I'm starting to see the value of this. So we have a number of students, and this is the first perspective that I can bring as sort of as someone who's helping students out with this, who are taking gap years and doing research as part of that gap year experience. We had a student from Vietnam, for example, whose background was primarily in business, had done a lot of that in high school, but had started to realize that her actual interest was applying to university in neuroscience and neurobiology. Now, she had no background in that and needed to figure out a way to make that transition and effectively communicate that this was something that she was interested in and that she had expertise in. So she did some Coursera edX courses, did a research, a sort of mentored research project on neuroscience, and through that was able to demonstrate what she was interested in. So that's one part of it, which is we're seeing more and more students think about research as part of that structured gap year experience. But the second part of it is that we're also expanding our team. We now have a team of about 17 full-time people. And as part of that, I'm starting to see folks who are applying, who've taken gap years either in high school or after college. And what that indicates to me as someone who's in industry is that A, they have the ability to take risks and take initiative. So this is someone who's really driving themselves and not just going to follow the same path that everyone else does. And the second thing is, in the interview process, it makes for a really interesting point of conversation. So there's something, it inevitably will get talked about, but that can be a really positive way to make a connection with the interviewer and make an impact and demonstrate that you're someone who's multidimensional, who'll fit in with the team, who'll be someone who brings interesting stories and perspectives to the table. So both as someone who's in industry helping students, as well as looking for folks to join the team. I think from both of these perspectives, I've seen the value of a gap year. I'm excited to talk more about opportunities for students in my section.
Thanks a lot, Dhruva. Vaishnavi, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we've heard a little bit from the school, the university, and the industry perspective. Can I have the slide up, please? Yeah. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to take you through the flow of what's coming up. So there are basically 4 categories of students, right, who we've summarized it sort of and bucketed them into 4 categories of students who end up taking a gap year. So the first is students who have planned gap years for financial reasons. So let's say that they couldn't get a loan sanctioned in time for their application to university, or that the scholarship that they hoped for did not come through. The parents had not finished the financial planning process. So that's one part of the planned financial gap years. So they stop and say, okay, we will pick this up next year. The next category is planned academic preparation. So we have talked about this quite a bit already. As Dhruva said, students who take gap years to study for the IIT JEE, the NEET, or any other competitive exam and prepare for it both locally and internationally. The third category is the planned gap years for exploration. You're just taking a gap year for a gap year to learn more about yourself, to travel, to do volunteer work, to do anything. And lastly, unplanned gap years. So if there's a health, family crisis, a financial emergency, or even in some cases, serendipitously good opportunities that come up that you might not have accounted for. So I have a college friend who decided to pursue music as a full-time career and got into the Berklee School of Music as well. And then just as she was about to leave, there was the an English singing reality show in India, the first one, it's called The Stage. She got a call to be on the stage just a week before she was about to leave for university. And she had to take a very quick call on, do I want to go to school or do I want to get that exposure? And she ended up going to that. So you also have positive experiences like that where people end up getting a different kind of opportunity that could benefit their career trajectory. And that's something to consider as well. So these are the 4 categories of students we've sort of bucketed to say why they might take a gap year. What my panelists are going to do right now is, from a school perspective, we're going to understand first, how do we have these conversations with parents? At least in the Indian context, it's one that we have to effectively persuade them to even consider as a viable option. So how do you have these conversations in a data-driven and impactful way? And from the university perspective, understanding what is it that we can do to effectively prepare ourselves to make a case to universities for our gap year, and how we can use the university exposure during our gap year for learning. And lastly, from the industry, Dhruva and I are going to do this together, but looking at all the different categories of what you can do in the gap year and what types of students would benefit from each of those experiences in the gap year. So we've mapped that process out. So this is what's coming up, and so I'll hand it over to Pragati for the first section on school.
Thank you, Kritika. Okay, I have 7 to 8 minutes precisely. We'll try and manage our time as well as we can. From a counselor perspective, we normally don't have conversations around gap year from an early stage. We shy away from it, and then all of a sudden we are pushed into it because either a student hasn't got the grades, he doesn't have the admissions, or all of a sudden there is some mental health issue, there are change in family circumstances. Suddenly it comes to us.
Sorry, Pragati, could you just keep the mic a little closer, like in this way?
Yeah? Okay. So all of a sudden we are pushed into it, and then we start thinking, like I was talking about myself 10 years back, when I was suddenly pushed into a situation where one student was resisting going to university and the other was very planned to go into a gap year. So instead of that, as a school and as a counselor, I feel that all of us need to start having these conversations a little earlier. It is nothing different from what we are already doing. All of us talk about, working during our holidays, doing internships, doing online courses. A lot of students are doing it, and especially with the pandemic, what has happened is that students are getting very used to doing online things. They're used to doing virtual internships. So what we need to do is turn those conversations and make them think that, do you want to do it long term, maybe for a few more months, to explore yourself? Is there a concept of gap year existing? So as a school, I start having these conversations with parents and students right from grade 10. And 90% of them don't end up taking gap years. But in our school, I see the trend now for the past 4 or 5 years. Every year we have anywhere between 5 to 15 students taking a gap year. That's a big number when it comes to school. As counselors, we have answerability. Our parents question us. Why are you having so many gap years? Something wrong with your admissions process? Our board of directors will ask you, what's happening, Pragati? Why are they taking so many gap years? We have to back it up with data and tell them why, how, and what. So the most difficult part of the puzzle becomes the parents, actually, because they are very anxious. And what we tell the students and the parents is that the biggest stakeholder in your entire life is either your child or your parent. Both have good intentions, and you need to respect each other for the perspective they have, because teenagers can get into a lot of conflicting situations, and then communication closes between the two. And there is an element of rebellion from the teenage side, and there's an element of pressure and authority from the parent's side. But the intention is the same. The child wants to be happy, and the parent wants the child to be happy and successful and be able to fend for themselves in the long run. So can we go to the slide? Okay. Yeah. So what happens is that, these are things all of us understand and we know. Parents are anxious, as to what are they going to do? Are you going to support them, or are you going to just let them be? Okay, you've taken a gap year, bye-bye, see you after a year, or see you never. It's a very anxious stage for parents and students. All of us have had that. As Kritika said, relatives have more of a say in the Indian context as to what your child should do, should not do, go where, not go there. Oh, why is she going to New Zealand? She should be going to the US. All good students go to an Ivy League. So everybody has an opinion, and as counselors, we actually have to become equipped with the skills to help the parents handle their child a little better when it comes to universities and gap years. What will my child do? All his friends are going off to university. What is going to happen? Is he just going to sleep around, watch Netflix, eat a lot of food, gain a lot of weight? It happens. It does happen with a few students. Gap year blues. When we were talking of gap years, as Dhruva was saying, my husband took a gap year to prepare for IIT JEE. He never prepared because he didn't want to be an engineer. He meandered around, eating, sleeping, going into depression, looking for something. And he ended up at university, and he never liked it. At this stage, he's found his calling, but it took 20, 25 years to reach that stage. So you don't want your students. We use a lot of storytelling and disclosures with parents also, telling them this is important because this is the evidence. Shall we move on to the next? It's not a new concept, right? So what I do is use evidence to convince my parents that, see, it's nothing that only your child is doing. It's nothing new in the world. In fact, the entire world is talking about it. There are researches happening which prove that, one of the major reasons that students, want to take, it's burnout. I want to take a break. I'm just tired of, studying. The desire to find out more about themselves. A few years back, I had a student who just didn't do applications. He would never come in for his appointments. And then towards the end of it, as a counselor, we are accountable, right? So we have to catch hold of every student. What's happening, what's happening, what's happening? Why aren't you applying? And then he said, ma'am, I don't even know who I am. I need that time to just figure out for myself what's going on in my head, what I really want to do in my life, and where do I want to end up? I don't know whether I want to go to Europe, India, Singapore. I just have no idea. So he just took that 1 year to explore himself. Studies have shown, and you can, later on we'll share the presentation, and you can go through the evidence. Studies have shown that people who do take gap years, and we have an evidence in Kritika over here, they find out more about themselves. They become a little more mature. They start understanding what their calling in life is. It changes, it's dynamic, and we talk about dynamism all the time. Even we want to change. Some of us are thinking we want to go back to university, right? So it's a changing thing, it's very dynamic. Help the parents to understand that through evidence. Shall we move on to the next slide? A lot of universities are talking about gap year, right? Anuradha will cover more about it when she talks, but I picked all these evidences out from their websites. A lot of them are saying that it's good to take a gap year. Go ahead, do it. In fact, some of them will support you with a gap year. That is somebody from the industry who says that traveling makes a difference, right? I don't know how many of you know this young gentleman. He's 25, 26-year-old, maybe a little younger, known as MBA Chaiwala. And I listen to him a lot. Because he's young, he's ambitious, and he has his YouTube channel. He's setting up a new, center. He just did it in Hyderabad a few months back. And so many people are following him. He talks about taking a gap year and traveling. Just travel and meet people. Just travel and talk to people. And there in UK also, the foreign secretary is talking about the same thing. That means it actually makes a difference in any part of the world. Quickly to the last one. Okay? There's a department set up to do researches on gap years and the efficacy of a gap year. India is still a little behind, but we are a huge population. But we as counselors are equipped with it. Lot of universities. Princeton says, come enroll with us, and then we are going to put you on a 9-month free service learning program. Go volunteer, because you'll come back as a better student. You'll come back with skill sets which are different. You'll come back more happy with yourself and who you are. You will have a sense of identity. So these are evidences that we as counselors can use with our students and start conversations early. You know, rather than leaving students to drop out at university, dropout rate at universities are very high, right? So we need to be careful that when they end up at university, they need to finish university. Of course, we are open to the idea. I had a lot of more examples, but I'm going to stop here, and maybe during the Q&A, I'm going to bring it up. But if you have any questions towards the end, we'll have some bit of dialogue and discussion. Did I stick to my time?
You did wonderfully well. I'm now scared to go after you, but just a question for my counselor friends here. Have you had any experience of sending your student to a university for gap year? Anybody who's had that experience of sending a student to the gap year? You've had that experience. Pragati, what's your student done at the university?
As I was saying that in Princeton, you know, we have this thing that you can go to them, and once you reach that university, then they tell you that, okay, if you want to take a gap year, this is a year-long program or a 9-month program, and you can go ahead and do it. Sometimes when they request for a deferral, but they are at the university, so they are not really studying, but they are out in the world working and developing their own selves. And they are meandering from a McDonald's to a KFC to a courier service to, you know, a treasurer, resident in charge. They do multiple things, but they'd never drop out. That is what I've realized, and the grades are higher.
Wonderful, yeah. Yeah, sorry, you have a comment?
What happens? Are they fees adjusted?
Right. So I'll come to some of these examples now. If I can just straight away go to my second slide, please. I want to give you examples of some of the practical things that your students can actually do at universities. The next one, please. Oh, sorry, again. So there are study abroad programs that are offered by most international universities. Now, study abroad can vary from a few weeks to a full semester. It could be a tuition fee-based program. It could be a free program. So this is a little bit of research that you might have to do before your student leaves. The week-long programs might award 6 to 8 weeks long programs, usually award a certificate. If it's a semester-long program, it will usually have a transcript awarded to the student, which is essential when they actually start applying for university admissions anywhere, right? If you can just stick to that slide, yes. Micro-credentialing, you would have heard of that word in the last 2-3 years quite a bit, right? So students pursue some bit of their program. It could be online, they could do in-person learning, and that credit is then counted towards their university degree. This is for students who are slightly more focused. They have a little bit of idea what they want to do in future, but they don't actually want to begin their university program immediately. They want to take it slow. So, you know, few hours of study in a week and not a full-time program, but they get awarded a micro-credentialing certificate for that. Internships, I think Dhruva is going to cover a lot about internships in detail, but the most important point from a counselor and university perspective is that internships are seldom paid at that level. So if you have a student who's looking for a paid internship, it will require a lot more research on your part to find that opportunity, and I think that's where organizations like Dhruva's play a role as well. In the last 2-3 years, we've also had a lot of virtual internships. Now that, you know, that sort of hesitation that virtual internship is just, you know, you just log in, you don't do any work, and then you log out in the evening, you're watching Netflix all through when you're virtually logged in. But that's not really true. When the universities give the students an opportunity to do a virtual internship, it actually is tied into very specific goals. It's similar to a project. So they will have a task, they will have an outcome they need to achieve, and it'll be time bound. Again, virtual internships are seldom paid. I'm just, giving this information because I'm sure the parents would want to ask if the student, is getting a paid internship or not. It's practically quite difficult to get those as paid internships. There are online courses. Someone mentioned Coursera earlier. I think Dhruva mentioned Coursera. Coursera offers a lot of programs, and there are other platforms as well. I have recently done a program through something called Emeritus. So there are a lot of platforms students can do online courses from. It doesn't necessarily have to be, in the same field that they want to pursue their higher education in. Let them do a little bit of exploring. They want to learn a language, excellent. They want to do a data analytics course. I'm a humanities person, and I've actually done a digital marketing course because I just want to understand how it works. I use social media, but I don't use it in an impactful manner. So I wanted to learn that. So they could be wanting to explore, and it's a great thing to do it at this stage, And they come out with a certificate. A lot of these programs are cost-free. They have a nominal cost attached if you need a certificate, but you can actually explore a lot of options through these websites. Yep, sorry. That's a great question. So micro-credentialing is mainly when you do an online course with a particular university. So for example, with Macquarie University, if you were to do a micro-credentialing program with me online for, let's say, 4 months, I would give you that credit when you enroll into the university, right? But if you were to do through like an independent platform, which I don't have a collaboration with, then you don't get my credits for that. It's simple as that, right? Language programs, I always recommend language programs because if you're aiming to study overseas or even in India, right, being multilingual is an amazing skill. If you have the skill to pick up a language, it's excellent. So again, we are in South India, so I have done my university from the University of Madras. I moved there after doing my grade 12. I did my uni there. It's very hard for me to pick up the language. And if someone had told me, it's better, I actually wanted to get to that university. So it's not that, I just randomly made that decision. But I wish someone had advised me to learn the language and then move. It would have made my life more interesting. There are specialized certificates that your students can do. Specialized certificates, again, as I said, if they are thinking of doing an engineering program later, might help to do a data analytics, data science certification from organizations like Google, Accenture, and all. There are a lot of corporates which offer specialized certificates. These are counted towards your admission as well. Specialized projects, universities do allow you opportunities to do projects. We've recently collaborated with the Australian government. Some Australian universities came together, and they were projects that were designed for students who were overseas, so mainly for South Asian students who could work with universities under university mentorship and do these projects, and they were counted towards their university application. Research, I think Dhruva is going to cover that, and I actually asked him to stand up, and I was getting closer to the completion of my time. He's already stood up. I just quickly want to go to this second slide, the slide after that. And just 3 scenarios, and we'll do a little bit more of this in the Q&A. When you have a student who wants to take a gap year before they have applied for a college, so they've done their 11th, 12th, and they want to take a gap year. What is your role as a counselor? When a student actually takes a gap year after college admission, so they've got the admission, but they've decided not to go, and they want to take 6 to 12 months off. And the third one is a gap year to prepare for college education. So I'm going to start from the bottom, and just another minute, Dhruva. Preparing for college is something very common that we do in India. JEE, medical, engineering, everything, law these days. I think a lot of kids take a gap year to prepare for these college educations. But the most important bit is where they have a gap year before college application. So number 1, are they doing it for the right reason? When you apply to the university, it has to reflect in the statement of purpose or the essay that you're writing to the university. So my student has taken a gap year. For what reason? That has to come across very clearly. they have an offer letter and they have taken a gap year, please check with the university if that offer can be deferred or not. Will they lose that offer letter if they've taken a gap year? Will they lose the scholarship if they have taken a gap year? If it's UK, what is the validity of the UCAS? Do they need to apply for that again? If it's Australia, we are looking at a genuine temporary entrant form. That form clearly asks you if you have a gap year, if there is a gap in your education. So those questions need to be asked and answered in the statement of purpose. I think I'll just quickly hand over to Dhruva now. I'm deeply conscious of the time, but if there are any questions after that, we'll be happy to take those. Yeah. Sorry.
Just I want to add up here. Scenario fourth is also there. That is gap year after college admissions because of visa. A number of students are facing that, and now they are writing to the universities about it. That everything is done. They have paid the fees also. Everything is done. The whole year fees is paid, but the problem is they cannot go.
So this is the brickbat I'm taking for my entire industry. Visas for all countries are delayed this year particularly. It's mainly because of staff shortage. Because of the pandemic, I think a lot of high commissions let go of staff. It's a worldwide problem. It's across all countries. So,
They're coming to us.
yeah.
Ma'am, what should we do? Now, if we are going to take this defer, they are not going to give us scholarships. So I told them to write to the university.
Yes, yes. That's the best advice. Write to the university. Every case is considered on case-by-case basis. So I'm sure there's something they'll figure out. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So my section hopefully is going to be pretty quick. What we're doing is Kritika and I have talked through sort of 6 different opportunities that students who are taking gap years have and try to map out what kinds of students each of those would be right for. So if we could just skip to the slides. Next slide. Next one. Excellent. So let's kick off. The first area is internships and work experience. Anuradha's already said a fair bit about that. And the idea here is that this is an opportunity to gain skills, get some work experience, and potentially explore a career that they are interested in. And next slide. So I think these are good for students who are unsure about the kind of career or field that's right for them, that are still a bit confused. The second one is it's also good for students who might lack the practical skills to transition into university, who are a little bit, cloistered, pampered, and it might help for them to go out into the real world and do something to learn things like time management and skills before they enter university. And finally, also who need to earn money. And so as Anuradha mentioned, like really fancy internships are probably not going to pay you. But if you work at a local store, if you work at a local McDonald's, ice cream shop, whatever it is, as uncommon as it is in our country, there are opportunities for students to earn money. And now there are also freelancing things that they can do online where they serve as translators, interpreters, research assistants, all of those things. I think the starting point for this is usually in your own community. So begin by reaching out to family members, friends, community members, reaching out to small businesses and startups. Large companies are less likely to take you seriously unless you already have an in. And finally, you can also think about participating in structured internships. So organizations like Virtual Internships or Tribes for Good are 2 companies that do this for students. And I guess for many students who are thinking about studying entrepreneurship and business, they could also consider starting something of their own to gain that work experience before they go off to college. The second option is classes and academic requirements. So this is for students who feel like they need to learn more before they go to university, either because they feel unprepared or feel underexplored. This is good. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide. So this is good for students who feel a bit not ready for university yet. They're worried about the reading. They're worried about the writing. They're worried about their academic preparation, or who need to satisfy entrance exam requirements as well. For these, I think there's a couple of different options available. The first one is, as we've already talked about, is there's a plethora of opportunities available online, Coursera, edX. I take German classes on this website called italki, which is awesome, and you get to speak one-on-one with someone every week. You can also reach out to local universities. So especially once you pass the age of 18, universities in India are much more open to having you on board. You could do a course through IGNU, the National Open University. All of those are options for students on gap years who want to build out their academic ability. You might also have people locally, so tutors or teachers in your city, if you want to learn a specific thing like a specific language or Python or whatever else, you probably have folks in your community who can help you with that. And then finally, as Anuradha mentioned, universities also offer summer schools and camps and things like that that students can explore. So this is for students who want to do sort of classroom, get that classroom experience. The third option is research experience. So this is one step beyond the classroom experience, where students feel like there's an area where they want to dig really deep into, gain mentored experience, and sort of build that relationship with a mentor, as well as create an output that they can be proud of. And so this is good for students who have an area, if we can move to the next slide, have an area that they think that they're pretty confident they want to explore, but aren't 100% sure of. Definitely for students who are academically strong and self-driven, I think research is a level beyond a classroom learning experience. So if a student is struggling in school, this might not quite be right for them. And then for many students, especially those who are considering reapplying to universities, who want to have something tangible that they can point to, which, in a classroom experience, you don't quite get because you have a transcript, but that doesn't show as much as saying, I've spent the last 6 months, 8 months, whatever, writing this paper, creating this project. So I think there's a lot of, once again, online resources that can be used for independent research, and that's something that you can begin with those courses that we talked about, and then consider following guides that are available online for research. The second option, and this is hard but can be pretty meaningful, is cold outreach to professors or PhDs. On average, students might need to reach out to anywhere between 50 to 60 professors to be able to get people to respond and get that sort of relationship going. The third is applying to structured programs, either at universities like MIT's Research Sciences Institute or Vanderbilt's Research Experience for high school students, or a structured research program that's run privately like Lumiere or Pioneer, if any of you were at the breakfast this morning. So those are all options for students who want to do research and dig deeper into that. Passing over to Kritika.
Okay, thanks, Dhruva. All right, so we've got another 3 categories and we'll go over them quickly. So the first one is community service and advocacy that I'm going to cover. So this is really for students who want to engage in some meaningful volunteer work during their gap year. It's a great opportunity for them to build empathy, engage in something that they feel passionate about, a cause that they would like to contribute towards, and have a really deeply personally reflective experience in their gap year as well. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so like I said, this could be for students who are looking for a meaningful and enriching way to spend their gap year. So they've decided to take the gap year from a planned and exploratory point of view. And they say that, okay, we want to dive into something that's going to give us that satisfaction. Students who have passion for a specific cause. So right from schools, in terms of the projects that they were engaged in, the volunteer work that they did at school, if there is a direction that they already feel like this is an area that I would like to contribute towards, then they could use their gap year to work at NGOs that do this. Students who are interested in pursuing a career in making a positive social impact. Now this is one that's really growing in popularity because a recent study has shown us that 74% of people are willing to take a pay cut to go into jobs that give them a sense of contributing towards the community, right? And 40% of startups by Gen Z and millennials are purpose-driven and are contributing towards perhaps an SDG. So with numbers like this which are growing in that direction, having students do volunteer work in an NGO or an organization that's working towards a particular cause is going to help them first strengthen their conviction in it, and secondly, also get a realistic sense of, okay, will I like the day-to-day work in this or not in the long run, right? And lastly, this is also something Dhruva and I had talked about in our planning, but again, students who lack exposure and are unaware of their privilege. Because we have students who, maybe parents might be more geared towards, pushing their students into doing this, but students who really are not really that mature, who don't really understand how to maximize their opportunities, it gives them an opportunity to get more grounded, get more humble, and get perspective of what it's like to work with people who are not as privileged. So what are the starting points for this? So there are 2 ways, I would say there are 2 pathways to approach this. Skill-based volunteer work or a cause-based volunteer work. What I mean by that is, let's say students don't have a very clear idea on what cause they would like to contribute towards. Then they can start by looking at what am I good at? So do I have good communication skills? Am I a good designer? Do I do good photography? What are the different NGOs or opportunities that are looking for work in this area? And then you make a decision based on logistical reasons, like do I want to live in my own hometown and do the volunteer work, or do I want to travel abroad and do it? The other route is you know what cause you want to contribute towards, you're very clear and focused on that. Then you start looking for organizations that support that type of work and the role that fits you best and the circumstances and logistical setup that fits you best. So there are two approaches for this. So depending on what your student is more geared towards, you can then guide them to make the decisions accordingly. The other thing is the local and international choice is very important because a lot of the operational decisions will center around that. Look at whether you want to be in your hometown, contribute towards maybe one or multiple NGOs. The other is you travel abroad for a project, and that could vary in duration, right? Some are as short as a week, some are as long as 40 weeks. So depending on that, you can make a decision. And some of the trusted organizations in this space, based on the research that we did really quick, was Plan My Gap Year, Maximo, Novell, GVI, and there are many more. This is just a few, and we can share these resources with you as well. Each of these organizations will specialize in a different area. So let's say some of them will specialize in gender studies, environmental awareness, or educating first-generation learners. Others might be specialized in different areas. So look at the areas that each of these organizations are working in, and the safety factor is so important, right? Parents are going to first and foremost ask for that. So these are organizations that are sort of trusted, and there are several others too. Lastly, research the requirements. Yes, fine. It's fine, go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, research the requirements when you're planning for the volunteer work. The next category is travel and creative pursuits. This is the one that it's going to be hardest to convince parents about, especially in schools where there's not as much proactive support towards it. But it's also the one that I just want to point out has the most meaningful and intangible benefits. We've talked a lot about how much gap years can help students gain self-awareness, gain self-confidence, and learn more about themselves. And while these can't be measured immediately, our keynote speaker yesterday, Mr. Anil, mentioned this, right? At this conversation, take a moment to look into someone's eyes, have a conversation, and you don't know what that's going to spark and where that's going to lead you. And an unplanned and an exploratory gap year through travel and creative pursuits is just like that. Can we go to the next slide? It'll open up opportunities that we may not even think of encountering and contribute towards personal growth that we can't really anticipate as well. So this is really quickly for students who are first and foremost comfortable with the concept of a gap year, and parents who are supportive of that as well. It's easiest to take that route. Students who are seeking clarity and looking to build self-confidence, whose families are supportive of their creative exploration. Also students who are looking to turn creative pursuits into careers. Let's say they take the gap year to engage in maybe forming a band, traveling with their folks. I didn't mention this in my introduction, but in my gap year, I also sang with the band to raise money for charity for 3 weeks. It was really fun. And I would highly recommend a creative pursuit. And students who can utilize their exploratory period well. Somebody talked about this earlier at the beginning of the session. So important, right? We don't want you to spend your gap year in front of the video game console. So if you're going to do a travel and creative pursuit route, very, very important that there is a roadmap in place for how you're going to spend that time traveling. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so the first one is organization. The way we can start is organizations that offer safe and free accommodation for work. There are organizations like Moving Worlds, where you could go to a particular spot, do a project. It's not necessarily one that's geared towards positive social impact or any volunteer work, but you're just, like, say for example, you're working at a youth hostel. You're helping them build up an extra wing. So that's the kind of work where they would provide you with accommodation and food, and you can check for the safety features of that place as well. They also might have an age requirement. You might need to be 17 or 18 to go, so 16-year-olds can't qualify. The other is enroll in certification license courses for various activities. Another fun thing I did in my gap year, I took a course in scuba diving, so I have a license. That was great, and I would highly recommend anybody who wanted to pursue any kind of certification course in that gap year, recreationally. It also makes for great conversation starters in interviews, by the way, not just from a recreational point of view, but it tells them a little more about you as a person. And avenues to showcase creative pursuits. So people can start a YouTube channel, a TikTok channel, start showcasing the work that they do, right? And build a portfolio of your creative pursuits for university as well. Finally, wellness retreats, great way to decompress, really take the time to reflect on yourself, and spend some time in self-care. So I'm going to hand it back to Dhruva for the last section, and then we'll conclude.
I think we're going to have to skip to question answers since we're past time already. So yeah, as we find someone who is going to ask the question, the final section we're just going to be on. So if anyone wants to put their hands up and get the mic, we can get started. Spending time with family, improving sort of your relationships with your community, your friends, can be really valuable. You can find ways of structuring this as well. For example, encouraging students to do an oral history of their grandparents or daily journaling. And those are ways of providing structure to something that is deeply personal and meaningful. And it's also important to ensure that students who are going through these periods have the mental health support that they need. So I'll stop with that and pass it back to you for Q&As.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just want to conclude with one last thought. The goal of today's session was just to help you all understand the various ways that we can perceive the gap year and how to plan for it effectively. While it might not be for everyone, I hope that we've been able to show you that it is a viable option for many people, and there's a roadmap that we can take to get there. So happy to take just one moment, ma'am. She's raised her hand first. Yeah.
So, you know, the concept of taking a gap year very often is very exciting for students.
Yeah.
How can we prevent them falling off the bandwagon along the way? You know, because then the counselor has signed off. So then the parents will turn around and say that
No, we don't sign off ever.
Okay.
Sometimes we have students who've taken 3-year gaps. You know, what we reassure them, as a school, we bring gap year in the conversation very early. Right in grade 10, when we start talking about subject choices, we bring in that conversation that university admissions is an option, going abroad is an option, staying in India is an option, gap year is also an option. So we bring the conversation early, and the first thing I tell them is that I will be there to support you even in that gap year. So you're not meandering around. So I'll quickly give one example. We had a student who took a 3-year gap year. So it's not a gap year, it's gap years. Reasons beyond control, actually. The family suddenly went through a huge financial loss. But every year we did applications for that child. Every year we guided her through, you know, work that she can do. A very creative and a confident child. So she was working with a fashion magazine throughout those 3 years, organizing MUNs, traveling in India as well. So as a counselor, you know, we have that ethical responsibility. We don't let go. I will come to your question, which you had asked about visa earlier. Sometimes students do not get the visa, which is beyond their control, and then we guide them that, okay, now you are in a gap year, let's plan it out. So my student went off to Africa, and he spent 6 months over there volunteering in a school, and then he came back, went on full funding to a Middle Eastern university. Now he's studying in University of California, US, for his master's. So they have wonderful trajectories. So we need to build that confidence and give a lot of anecdotal information to parents and students and bring it on the table, have conversations.
Sorry, can I just quickly add here from the university application perspective, if it's a gap year or gap years, please advise your students to document everything. Because when they apply for the admission anywhere, they'll need to have those documentary evidences. And if it's overseas, then the visa office will also ask for documents. So it also depends on the duration. If it's a few months, between 3 to 6 months, it's fine with most universities. But if it's a longer duration, usually in my experience, if the gap is for more than 5 to 6 months where they have nothing to show for, then it gets an issue. But if there are circumstances beyond control, then as a counselor, a recommendation letter from you helps.
Ma'am, this question I would like to address to Pragati ma'am. Pragati ma'am, I appreciate your research that you have done for Princeton and the case studies. Let's come to the Indian context, right? Have children in India taken gap years and gone to Indian universities, and what struggles have they faced or not faced, and how have been able to come? Is India open to gap years? My basic question is that.
No, no, no. None of the Indian universities will say, come study with us or get admission and we'll give you a gap year. But most of the Indian universities which are emerging and new age are perfectly fine with the idea of a gap year. They want an explanation, as Arunadha was saying, and there are many students who take gap year beyond those 6-7 months. We have one full year. As a school, we offer them long-term internships, which is a year long. We tell them, come back to school, volunteer with us. Okay? So Indian universities have no aversion to gap years. In fact, the government sector is perfectly fine with gap years because it has existed. 1 year gap for preparation, right?
Yeah. Okay, just for some context, I also studied in an Indian university for my undergrad. I didn't go abroad to study, so it was not challenging at all to do the gap year transition process. They require proper documentation though, like they said. That's just the underlying factor. Do you have your mark sheets in place? Do you have your letters of recommendation in place? Do you have your essay in place? Does your essay explain your gap year as well in the context? So as long as you have all of the relevant factual details listed and the documentations to support it, traditional and new age universities are open to gap years. So it's not really that challenging. And in fact, I think it's becoming more and more popular. There was a study which showed that universities in now, actually just yesterday it came out in an article, that universities in Pune and Varanasi have short-term research and other project-based learning for students in gap years in India. So this is the first of its time.
They value it. They value it. See, most of the teachers and professors are actually researchers. They understand the value of the gap year, especially in today's day and age. So I think it is not a cause for concern as long we have our researchers in place. Any more questions?
Great. Thank you so much for the interesting conversation and discussion. Mine is not a question, but just, as a testimonial of the gap year programs that we offer to students in Zimbabwe.
Sorry, could you speak up a little bit? We're not able to hear.
Okay, am I now audible? Great. So I was saying mine is not necessarily a question, but to give a testimonial of the gap year programs that we've started to offer in Zimbabwe in our own context, something which was unconventional and that we offer to students who are still in high school. So my school provides them a gap year of leadership development after completing their O-levels before transitioning to the last 2 years of their high school. And I should say, and I must say, it's something that wasn't, common, not used to, but what I've learned over the years is if it has never been done, doesn't mean it can't be done. So we have to start it. And with the experiences of the students that have gone through the gap year compared to students that don't go through the gap year, there's a massive difference at that level. So I believe and I see, and I've also began to have the buy-in of the gap years because the exposure helps a lot. I've had students who come through and said, when I joined the academy, I thought I wanted to study medicine. Then, my passion is into law. Some join and they say, I need to study engineering. Then they identify their passion is into economics. Why? Because during that gap year, we give them exposure. And not only that, they also get an opportunity to travel, as was also mentioned. And not only that, they also get an opportunity to cross-pollinate ideas as young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think we're going to have to pause here. Thank you all so much for being with us. Please do share your feedback. It'll be really helpful for us. And have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.